Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Tiana Paschel, and I'm a professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies, as well as sociology here at UC Berkeley. I am the co-principal investigator, along with Dr. Lee Rayford of the Black Studies Collaboratory, which is a recipient of the Andrew W. Mellon Just Futures grant. The collaboration that we have here with the Black Studies Collaboratory is an initiative that is meant to, as part of the Just Futures Grant, address racial inequality through bold and unique humanities-based research projects. And I'm sitting here today with you from East Oakland, California. And it's important to recognize that whether I'm here at my home or on the UC Berkeley campus, that we are on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo speaking Ohlone people. And we recognize that every member of the UC Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. We also acknowledge that the Ohlone people are thriving members of the East Bay community who are actively imagining more just futures and engaging the tools that are needed to do that imaginative work. So before I introduce today's event, I would like to thank those who made this work possible today. BSC team, Barbara Montano, Gilberto Rosa Duran, Maria Heredia, and Alicia Harger, who's here today, who'll be moderating the Q&A later. I'd like to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. I'd also like to thank Alana and our colleagues at ETS, our Spanish language interpreters, Marcy and Claudia, to Aberdeen Captioning, as well as Dara Baldwin and Evelyn Shin for making the time to be with us today for this panel. It is my pleasure to introduce today's event, Black Love, Black Power, Black Families in America, the fifth of a series of 10 events curated by our Abolition Democracy Fellows. And I should say the first part of a two-part series. Since September of last year, our 15 Abolition Democracy Fellows, which includes activists, artists, and academics from a range of disciplines, speaking multiple languages and at various stages of their careers, gathered weekly with care and audacity, with wonder and joy to envision alternative presents and futures. We broke bread together, we laughed together, we cried together. And we have been thrilled this spring to open up that space for critical engagement and collaborative imagining towards more just futures with this event series. So today's event is the first of two panels that were thoughtfully curated by our activist fellow, Zach Norris. Zach was born in San Francisco, but likes to be clear about moving, I think within days or weeks, to Oakland, California, right, where he was raised. Zach received his BA from Harvard, followed by a JD from NYU Law, and studied at the Labor Community Organizing, Strategy Center's National School for Strategic Organizing in Los Angeles in 2001 or 2021. Zach was named Soros Equality Fellow. And in November of last year, he stepped down from the position of executive director of the Ella Baker Center, a formidable organization that if you don't know, you need to know, where Zach began his work nearly 20 years ago, where he talks about this as starting as an inquisitive law student intern there, right? Zach has brought so much to the Black Studies Collaboratory, and we are so thankful for you. I am gonna pass this over to Zach to lead us off on this first event of two. And I really look forward to the discussion today. Thank you so much for organizing this panel.
Thank you so much, Tiana. So greatly appreciate that warm introduction. And yeah, I was born in San Francisco. We moved to Oakland when I was a week old. I like to say it was a week too late because I love Oakland just that much. No disrespect to San Francisco. And I appreciate also you just naming whose lands we stand on. And I think that's going to be an important part of this conversation, is really reckoning with a history of genocide, slavery, that we live in that legacy. So today's topic is really talking about families and how we conceive families given the context of white supremacist settler colonialism that really informs the history and the present day reality of this country. And so my name is Zach Norris. I'm formerly the executive director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, but I think activist in residence with the Black Studies Collaboratory is the best title I've ever had. I'm really excited to be a fellow, and the work with Tiana and Lee and Barbara and so many others has really been phenomenal. And so I feel super blessed. I feel blessed because I get to be on a panel with a couple of friends, and Evelyn Shin and Dara Baldwin, who are also brilliant and amazing. And I'll talk more about them. But I feel blessed just because if you think about family, you can just really trace back how many connections and coincidences are necessary for us to actually be here. How many struggles. I think about my own family on my father's side and the sacrifices that my grandparents made, leaving the South and coming to California to establish permanent, residence here in the Bay Area and San Francisco. There are so many things that have to come together just so for us to be here. And I want to start by actually just honoring that. And I'm going to ask that we take a couple of breaths while we remember the folks that made it possible for us to be here. So if you'll follow me, we'll take a breath in and a breath out. And a breath in and a breath out. And one last breath in and out. And we get to be here, Black and breathing, as they say, or here and breathing, as we say, and just want to honor again all of the folks that made it possible. Thank you, Tiana, for naming those folks to make it possible for us to be here and having this conversation. We called it Black Love, Black Power, Black Families in America, and we intentionally spelled America wrong. Like I saw it spelled in one of Ice Cube's albums, if I remember correctly, with the KKK in it. And that is to note that embedded in the fabric of this country, its flag, its anthems, its monuments, and its institutions is a history of white supremacist and patriarchal violence that has served the interest of a few at the expense of the many. And as we'll discuss, it's even shaped how we come to understand family. And it is intimately tied to that history. So our goals in this two-part series, as Tiana mentioned, this is a two-part series. And over these two parts, we're going to talk about the United States practice of not recognizing and separating families, the resilience and fight back of families despite this history and ongoing reality, and what we can do about it. What government policies, what campaigns and initiatives would help repair past harms, and what policies might actually enhance family resilience and survival strategies that are now more necessary than ever in the context of intersecting crises. So even I'm going to go out of order a little bit and actually introduce Evelyn Shin first. And I want to do that because as I was taking some breaths, I was reminded of some of the work that we used to do with Forward Together, and some of the practice of embodied leadership that I've learned from Evelyn Shin, who is principal at Leading Courageously, where she supports BIPOC women, trans and non-binary leaders stepping into their power. She recently also left Forward Together a little bit longer than I, where she was executive director also for a little bit longer than I for 22 years. Evelyn's leadership began in 1999, and Forward Together has become widely recognized for its innovative leadership, role in the reproductive justice movement. And I'm trying to slow down, to remember to slow down for the translators. In 2010, Evelyn and other leaders launched the Strong Families Initiative. That's how I got to know Evelyn, which now works with over 190 organizations to change the way people think, feel, and act in support of families. I could say more about all of the accolades that Evelyn has received, but I want to say that Ev is an incredible leader who's been a mentor to me, not just as an executive director, but really as a leader, period. And I've gotten to know and appreciate your work, Ev. And we were able to collaborate on a report called Who Pays the True Cost of Incarceration on Families, which was co-produced by the Ella Baker Center and Forward Together. An incredible, sometimes difficult, but mostly incredible experience. And just want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom. And now I also get to introduce Dara Baldwin. Dara is the Director of National Policy for the Center for Disability Rights, Inc., which is a nonprofit community-based advocacy and service organization for people with all types of disabilities. It's responsible for legislative work, research and writing comments, testimonies, letters, and reports, to assisting with advocacy, outreach, and working with congressional staff, the administration, coalition partners, and others on multiple issues and areas for improving the lives of persons with disabilities. And I would underscore "and others" because Dara is in touch with damn near everybody. Everybody I know, Dara is in touch with. She has extensive knowledge of the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, also very true, is an expert analyst of pertinent legislative proposals and enactments, and just has a keen ability, also underscore, keen ability for networking and outreach to grassroots national and international advocates. I would also add, Dara knows her shit. And I can say that because my daughter is not on this Zoom call. If she were, she'd be like, "Daddy, language." But she's not on this Zoom call. So Dara knows her shit. She doesn't suffer fools. She is fierce and yet brings people together across communities for justice. So I am just so blessed to have you both in this conversation with me. So thank you so much. And we're gonna start with the question really to just kind of ground us in this conversation. And that question is, what does family mean to you? And Ev, since I introduced you first, maybe I'll start with you first, if that's okay.
Thanks so much, Zach. It's just a pleasure and a joy to be on this panel with you, and to, it is the first time I've met Dara, but I've heard of her. And also I was talking to someone yesterday and they're like, "Oh my God, you're gonna be with Dara." So yes, Dara does know everybody. I wanna also thank Tiana and Alicia and the UC Berkeley African American Studies Department and the Black Studies Collaboratory for hosting this really wonderful series and inviting me to be part of it. It's really an honor. So my family includes my parents who immigrated from China, my brother, and all the extended relatives from my parents' side, and my two daughters, Jessica and Rose, my partner Jen and her family on her side. But it also includes the people that I grew up with that I'm not related by blood, but who are my aunties and uncles. And of course, you know, my chosen family, right, of friends and loved ones. And my family's a large kind of loose network of people whom I care deeply for, and, you know, plan to be with them, taking care of each other through the rest of our lifetimes. And I believe that, you know, families, everyone should have the agency to define family for themselves. Because like my family, there's so many ways families are formed in the United States, and it's only expanding. So single parenting, grandparenting are increasing. The number of same-sex couples are on the rise, as is the number of multi-generations living under one house. Among LGBT communities, chosen families, kind of that definition is expanding. So a recent study in Minnesota found that 66% of respondents consider friends, roommates, coworkers, you know, children of friends neighbors as part of their chosen family. And as you will hear from Dara, I think folks who have disabilities also have that expanded definition around chosen family. And then, as we have seen study after study, and we know kind of what's happening with the devastating impact of the prison industrial complex in our country. Nearly half of all people in the United States now have an immediate family who has spent or is currently spending time in jail. And we know that family incarceration is even more pervasive among Black families, with 3 in 5 African Americans who have an immediate family member who has spent time or currently spending time in prison. And so from these stats, it is not surprising that, 20%, it's actually less than 20% of families in the US fit this rights definition of the nuclear family, with 2 married heterosexual cisgendered parents and their biological kids. And yet our policies don't address what our families look like and what they need. And so, as Zach mentioned, the work that I did at Forward Together and that Forward Together is continuing to do is really bringing together organizations across sector, across geography, across the country to really tackle this problem of this horrible misalignment around our culture and our policies with what our families look like and what they need. And when it is misaligned like this, and we did actually a study before this showing that the definition of family actually expanded for a while until Clinton, where it started to get more and more rigid. And that's where you see a lot of the harm happening, because it meant that people weren't getting access to, being able to care for their loved ones, being able to go to the hospital. They weren't getting access to, food and housing, healthcare. They didn't get access to places around like shelters and safety. And so what we did around Strong Families is to really try to take the terrain back from the right and to change the way people think, feel, and act in support of families in terms of how we know them to be. And so Zach asked me to just briefly share kind of one of our campaigns called our Mama's Day campaign, which we did early on, is still continuing. But basically, what we are saying is that a strong family is one in which every member has the opportunity to thrive. And it's a way to interrogate patriarchy, heterosexism, transphobia, religious fundamentalism. And so I just wanted to share some cards. So basically, we partnered with artists from communities of color to create cards for Mama's Day that depict the mamas that you don't usually see on traditional Hallmark cards, but absolutely deserve to be recognized and honored, right? And so these are mamas that are in the media, criminalized, invisibilized, pushed out, dehumanized. And it also helps us create a space for us to say that mamas need more than flowers and brunch one day a week, one day a year, but we need kind of access to healthcare and living wage, right? We need systemic changes. So I'm just gonna briefly just go through quick snapshots of can you see that? So this was one of the earlier cards that Amaryllis created. It's a very powerful card, and it's around mamas who are formerly or currently incarcerated. This is a card that, again, Amir did with Baji, which works with Black immigrant families. Amir did a number of pieces of art for them that are now using as Mama's Day cards. This was actually one of the first cards that Veronica did with this caption. This went viral on the first year that we did the campaign. So we have kind of various cards, and I'll end with this last one. This was by Micah Bazant and Patty Byrne, Patty along with Mia Mingus and Stacy Milburn created kind of the disability justice framework. And so these cards in total have been part of campaigns targeting state and federal legislators around national caregiving campaigns, around immigrant rights campaigns. And it really is about kind of shifting the culture and the images that we have about mamas in our communities. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Ev. Really greatly appreciate that. And thank you, Miss Muse, also for the comment in the chat, which I'm not sure everybody can see, but the term America with the KKK spelling goes long back before the Ice Cube album to the Black freedom movements in the 60s. Miss Muse, Daphne Muse is the elder in residence with the Black Studies Collaboratory. So I just want to shout out Miss Muse. Thank you for that. And Dara, I'll pass it to you to talk to us a little bit about what does family mean to you?
So, and I'm sorry I keep coming on. I was having my door open. Of course, they're doing construction and they decided to start right now when we're doing this. So sorry. But thank you, Zach, and everyone at UC Berkeley for this conversation and for inviting me. As Zach said, I'm always amazed when people introduce me, but fine. I wanted to add, I am in Washington, D.C. I have to say DC statehood, that is part, right, of the fact that we are taxation without representation. And I am on Piscataway and Anacostia, stolen indigenous land here, and giving honor to the indigenous folks who are also very much a part of the DC community. And ignored. But Ev, thank you. You touched on a lot of the things I was going to touch on, but for me, family is what Ev said. I'm blessed. I had a mother and a father who gave birth to me and raised me. A lot of people did not have that. I was not born in this country, so I started my life outside of the country because my parents were serving their country. I started in Spain and lived in Europe for quite a little bit of time, came back to the United States, and they brought me home to Newark, New Jersey, where, right, Baraka was. And I can honestly say I was in and out of the Hope House, which was, right, our family, as my mother taught us, family by creation. These are people who are going to love you. They're from your neighborhood and your community. And Amir Baraka was an uncle to me. Ross Baraka is my cousin. We grew up together. And so, as Ev said, yes, blood does make you family, but creation and being with people make you family. And a little bit about my life. I started in healthcare first. In public health. And yes, I'm this old, people look at me, but yes, I worked in hospitals right in the late 80s, early 90s when HIV and AIDS started. And I can remember partners who were in the hospital and their family members who were the gay community could not come and visit them, right? Because people had cut them off. And as Zach was saying, I know my shit. I told them, come at night when there's nobody at the guest desk and there's nobody who cares, and just walk right on upstairs, go visit who you want to visit, and get out before 6 a.m. before that first nurse comes back on the floor, right? Like, don't tell me you can't do something, figure out some other ways, but that's family, right? And those are times when you need your family, and especially people with disabilities. And I really want to preface this. Love Me and Mingus and the whole Leroy Moore and Keith Jones are never talked about as also people who helped found disability justice, and they are Black disabled men who helped in that group. But today you may not have a disability, like I say they because I'm an able-bodied person or a non-disabled person, but you could walk out your door tomorrow and be a person with a disability. Let us all understand and know that. And if COVID hasn't taught us that, be very clear. And in the disability community, the ADA was created not for doors and ramps. It was created for community integration as a civil human right. The doors and ramps came with the 1968 Architectural Barrier Act. And anybody wants training on this, just call me, I'll give it to you. But I'll get real quick. The reason the ADA had to come about was because of, in 1896, you had what's called the Ugly Laws, UGLY. I'm saying that word. And they started in San Francisco, like love, this very progressive place, but they started in San Francisco and went around the world and still exist in some parts of the world. And what that said was basically, if you had a disability, you could not be in public spaces. And that is a lot, right? No schools, carnivals, grocery stores, parks. You are not allowed to bring your family member who has a disability. And then in 1933, the racist, ableist FDR created the New Deal, which is a racist and ableist social services law that we'll get into in a minute and later with F. But anyway, in there, he codified the institutionalization of people in the Ugly Laws, because he said, instead of keeping them at home, let's put those people in institutions. And there started the fact of institutionalizing folks. And that's where you started seeing institutions. And then, right, another 20, 30 years later, we see the abuse starting to come out, that the people who were in those institutions, specifically people who were born with disabilities, and you can see it immediately, but then also later in life, you will hear of the Olmsted v. Lois Curtis case. Please say that full name. Why? Because Lois Curtis is a Black woman, still very much alive, Georgia Peach, she lived in Georgia. And she was around 8th grade. She had some mental health issues in her life, and her family was told, put her in an institution and just don't worry about it. And she was the one who fought to get out. And that the Olmsted v. Lois Curtis Supreme Court case is her case, and it codifies Title II of the ADA and civil rights, and that if someone is in an institution, they want to get out, they must get out. Now, I say all of that because we have a large group of mostly BIPOC disabled people who have come out of institutions, and when you're in those institutions, they literally had no birth certificate. Some of them don't know how old they are, and right, they don't know who their family is. They don't know who their siblings are. So when they come out, and I work for what is called a CIL, a Center for Independent Living. Those are places where people with disabilities go for services, non-residential places. And we usually get people out of institutions and try to get them right. It's the chicken before the egg: housing, employment, education, mostly housing, right? But anyway, we get them to places and we try to create families for them. That is one of our charges of the CILs, is fellowship. And many times people say it doesn't work, getting people out of institutions, and they get them into an apartment and it doesn't work. It's because they isolated them. Most people in those institutions have been used to being around lots of voices, lots of people. And so when you take them and put them in an apartment by themselves, they're not around family. They don't have a family. They don't have an opportunity to create that family. And so in the disability community, we have always used family by creation, and many people do not know who their parents are, who their siblings are. And I'm a sister to so many disabled people, and I love it. And have my brothers and sisters and my trans friends and non-binary who are disabled. And that becomes part of that network. And the last thing I'll say too is, again, I come from the disability justice lens, where we center Black, BIPOC, Indigenous, and people of color, disabled folks, using those 10 principles, the first being intersectionality, the last being collective liberation, which means leave no one behind. And that's also in our work. And I'm sure I'll talk more about families, but don't want people to forget that. And disability rights, there is a difference. Disability rights folks center white people to this day, even during COVID, and will not take on those 10 principles. And until we as a country learn to center and use disability justice, that once we resolve the problems for Black, Indigenous people of color who are disabled, we will resolve the problems for everyone, including what family is and what it means. And we'll talk Eve later about how this looks in DC, right, around all of these family equal pay bills and all of this that's happening in DC, and how people even in DC, so-called white progressives, have still taken on the America KKK definition of family.
Thank you for that, Dara. And Ev, just super insightful right off the bat. I want to thank you for lifting up intersectionality and also just collective liberation. And I think that leads into the second question that I have for y'all, which is just, further describing your work and background. What do we need to understand in order to understand your work? And I know, Ev, I think you have some slides in terms of really, maybe not for this question, but if you could talk about your work and under anything you haven't mentioned that we should understand to understand your work.
Yeah, and actually, is it okay, because if I could talk about kind of like the ways in which the myth of the white nuclear family, because it's so much a part of
Great.
the work.
Yeah. So one of the questions we had, thank you for prompting that, we'll just merge those, is like, what is the myth of the white nuclear family? Who or what is served by this mythic family, and how does it relate to kind of concept of kinships, family by creation, chosen family? So we'll have those questions together, and I'll pass it to you, Ev, first, and then to Dara.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so in I'm going to share some slides that kind of point to kind of some historical analysis of how families have been treated in policy, as Dara kind of alluded to. This analysis for Together kind of pulled from the foundations that other organizations, including Applied Research Center, Political Research Associates, and Center for Third World Organizing in the Bay, kind of brought together in terms of foundation, and then we overlaid this analysis with family. So, and this is not a complete analysis, but I think you'll get the gist of what we're trying to say around the how family has been used in policies to harm communities. Okay, so I just, again, it's been said multiple times, but I want to just say the importance of acknowledging that at its core, our country in its modern day origins is founded on tearing apart families, subjugating them to horrific and dehumanizing conditions of enslavement and settler colonialism. So that is part of our DNA. I'm going to shift us forward to the New Deal, which Dara also mentioned, right? So in the 1930s, you know, after the Depression, the Great Depression, FDR created this New Deal, which for the first time defined a role for government in ensuring that, you know, families get the assistance they needed. Now, as Dara pointed out, it was racist, it was ableist. It did not include a huge portion of families, including Black families and other families of color. And so you had things like the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was created in 1933 to make affordable mortgages to over, you know, 1 million families so they could buy their homes. And 1% went to the loans went to African Americans. So that's an example kind of the racist kind of exclusionary and discriminating ways in which these first kind of efforts to help families actually manifested. So also shifting now a few decades, we have kind of in the 60s and 70s, you know, civil rights and welfare rights making gains on the ground, including greater access and into the social safety net of programs around welfare, right, and Social Security that was created in the 30s. And in the following decades, actually, as I mentioned in the beginning, the definition of family continued to expand through federal legislation, through Supreme Court decisions, through these social safety net programs. And so, for example, food stamps, the target was not a family, it was a household, right? So everyone in your household or caregivers. Rental assistance, Section 8 housing allowed family to be defined by each state with the goal of, you know, with the intention or of making sure that you could define family that was expansive so people could get access to rental assistance. But as we were kind of the progressive movement was making these gains, we start to see in the 60s the development of analysis and framing of families that become the foundation for some pushback on the progressive advancement that is now present to this day, right? So in 1965, the Moynihan Report was released and started to name certain families as a problem, right? And started to define the African-American family in particular as inherently dysfunctional, kind of based in ways because you know, African-American communities and families look different in terms of structure and gender roles than kind of the white nuclear family. And so this was a pivotal moment in this country of a cultural shift where the family and policy began to be raced in this way and codified. And then we have evolution of the race notion of family was further developed and used as a political weapon. You have Nixon using the Southern strategy, the war on drugs, again, targeting poor Black communities and Black families, and the Republican Party beginning to actively use race as a wedge issue to build political power in the Southeast, but also creating a racialized patriarchal set of values that, not only define the Republican Party, but the essential values and identities of who is a deserving family. So then in the 1970s, you begin to, the Heritage Foundation was founded, right? And so what we begin to see is that even though the right had a number of think tanks and strategy centers, the Heritage Foundation was really notable for its contributions to, creating this culture shift of within social supports, who gets to get these entitlements and who actually deserves to be supported, right? And so we begin to see a shift, which the progressive movement has pushed around families being excluded and discriminated and wanting to address that, to families who don't fit this idea of what a heterosexual white nuclear family looks like, and start to codify like, well, those families don't actually deserve kind of assistance. And though they really help to bring this myth of the white nuclear family into fruition. And I just want to say that even for white people, throughout our history, the structure of a nuclear family among white people is also a myth, right? Because of the war, because of the Depression, like families look differently even in white communities. And so it's really clear that the notion of this white picket fence nuclear family was created by the right, not from any kind of reality, even within their community, right? But to move the right's political and ideological agenda. And so we begin to see kind of in the 80s, this shift in culture and policy that happened because of these overlapping kind of forces on the right. So we had the religious right, who was using values and religious arguments to decide which families are deserving and who's not. The secular right, who was using business and corporate arguments to decide who is deserving and whose families should get support. And then the xenophobic right, who used racist arguments about who is American, right? And white nationalism in terms of who we should be supporting and centering. And so together, we begin to see in the 80s and 90s and throughout kind of policy change from this culture shift that the right pushed starting in the 60s, right? And we begin to see the impact. So we see the shrinking role of government and state rights. We begin to see the strict enforcement of heterosexual and patriarchal norms. We see unfettered free market capitalism. We see that the US is, increasingly being defined as a Christian nation. And so what we have now, through the 80s, through the 90s, and into now is kind of an all-out assault on families and in our communities that is based on a ground game, but also we have folks in government at the Supreme Court, bolstered by their power to basically continue their attack and dismantling of families, on BIPOC communities, on immigrants, folks with disabilities, and queer and trans folks. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there. But I really wanted to kind of share, like, this isn't just, it was an assault kind of that was through culture and policy and organizing and movement building that the right has enabled these conditions so that now we have what's happening in terms of attacking trans communities, what's happening in Texas, which we'll talk about later.
Thank you, Ed, for that. I feel like you just unveiled the foundation of so much of this, what we're up against in 5 minutes. So just appreciate that. And I think one of the things I want to just logistically name is that Q&A. So if folks have questions, please start to send in questions via the chat, and Alicia Harga will be kind of moderating the chat after we conclude our comments. I also wanted to lift up what you were saying about the myths that this nuclear family dynamic puts out there. And one of those is that white families are self-reliant and they do for themselves and they're the makers, right? And I, in reading The Way We Never Were by Stephanie Coontz, just want to highlight a passage where she says, models of traditional American independence, the frontier family, archetype of American self-reliance, and the 1950s suburban family whose strong moral values and work ethic are thought to have enabled so many to lift themselves up by their bootstraps. In fact, these two family types probably tie for the honor of being the most heavily subsidized in American history, as well as for the privilege of having had more of their advantages paid for by minorities and the lower classes. So really talking about the way in which the work of Black women and women of color was defining family, and who was left in and who was able to take care of their children, which we know goes all the way back to some of those origins that you talked about in terms of genocide and slavery in this country. So we'll come back to that, but I want to pass it to you, Dara, just to talk about this same topic in terms of the mythology of the family and what functions it served.
Sure. And Eve, I love you and I love what we're doing here. I'll just say this. I come from a space in my work where both these sides, when people say the right and the left, are our enemy. And especially when it comes to Black people, and especially when it comes to Black disabled folks. And both sides have performed in the destruction of family and the defining of family. As I said, I don't even understand what the term progressive and liberal means when you have housed it and had a foundation in the New Deal. And anyone who has read about them, so I have a master's in public administration, and people, I had to really think hard about getting that degree because it was created by one of the most racist presidents we had in the White House, which was Woodrow Wilson. Right? He is the founder of public administration. And that's how deep I am. And I received 2 awards for my work in public administration and turned them down, declined, because they were named after that man. I can't take this. So I want to start by saying that. And in fact, the New Deal, as Eve laid out, that is correct, but there were other sides of that. And in the book, The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein covers this. I am a housing activist. I believe housing is a human right. And he talked about the actual creation of redlining. Now, Eve touched on it a little, but the 1%, as far as giving mortgages, but they literally set up, this is why we have communities and gated communities. This is what FDR put in his plan, create communities where we can live, white folks, and them others can go over here and we don't care what they live in. It is why, right, like the city of Houston, I do a lot of accessible reviews and went to the city of Houston before Hurricane Maria, and Houston had built this beautiful city in the middle of town with those, had the gates to come up when the moats were going to flood because of hurricane. And who lived on the other side of the moat? Poor, Black, indigenous people of color, disabled folks. And you saw what happened when Hurricane Maria came, and we told them that, right? Like, this concept still exists, and that is progressives pushing that forward. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not here with this, the right and they are enemy. Both these people are enemies, and so is the Democratic Party, because if every system in this country is racist, the Democratic Party was created in this country by white men. It is just as racist, right? I am an abolitionist, be very clear, and I'm a Black liberationist. And I don't play these games with people about this right and the left. And Moynihan came from the left side. Let's be very clear here. And his wonderful mentee, Senator Hillary Clinton, right, and Bill Clinton, who you said, right, come from him. And so let's be clear about that, and how not only did they do that in the New Deal, but they also hit labor, and they created a minimum wage, not only for very much, systemic white jobs, and cut out farm workers, right? And cut out disabled folks. A lot of people don't know about 14C sub minimum wage. And I say all of this because it affects people's families, especially for our people, disabled people, getting them out of institutions. And then they can't even get jobs where they can make serious money, because also when he created social services and stuff, for those people who were wealthy enough or privileged enough to not be in institutions, he made sure they wouldn't be paid, right? That they couldn't receive payment. Sorry, they're starting construction again. They couldn't receive payment. And they couldn't have real jobs, which still exists today. When you see the unemployment numbers for people, double it for disabled people, white disabled, triple it for Black disabled, and quadruple it for Indigenous disabled folks, right? Because they can't get these jobs because people think, oh, you can't be here. If you were not supposed to be in the community, why are you working? Why you want an education? And that affects who you are as a family, right? So that part of that history. And it is a lot of slavery. A lot of the slave mentalities were there because how did the slave master control very strong, very able-bodied Black bodies? They cut their foot off. They cut their toe off. They cut things off of their bodies to make them disabled people, to make sure you couldn't run too far, right? They cut babies out of our women's bodies so they couldn't be the full woman they were once they gave birth to that one child or 10, or after they had 3 or 4 of them. We don't want you to have any more. And so this has always been part of the history of like what family is, and why disabled people have a hard concept of even defining their families and what it is. And then when it comes to the laws, along with the social service laws, right? They put in, FDR did this, which these laws are still on the books from 1930s, right? That you cannot get married. There's a marital right, bars them from getting married and having any kind of relationship. And that's that intersectionality, and that's not leaving behind. We talked a lot to LGBT community when they were doing marriage equality and saying, why aren't you including the disabled in that marriage equality for them? And the reason being is that if you make too much money, literally over $31,000, which that's a lot of money, but anyway, you lose your benefits, you lose your Medicaid. So in order to stay in the community, many people need a personal assistant who comes to their home and cleans their body, gets them dressed, helps them with their clothes, their breakfast and things like that, and then comes back at night. So if you and your mate, whoever it is you want to partner with, are both on these, services programs, and y'all want to get married, you now increased your income. And this is very basic, just for people. And Social Security will cut you off. And then what happens? You can't afford, because you don't have a good job that gives you the benefits you need to have a personal assistant. Because personal insurance, commercial insurance, like if you're non-disabled like myself and my Blue Cross Blue Shield, they don't cover personal assistance. They're not doing that for disabled folks, right? Because that's not considered part of the family plan, right? So here you have a whole insurance system that says, what we're not paying for that personal assistant to come to your home and take care of you, but that is a necessity for a lot of disabled people. So you have that coming forward. And even, when it comes to any of these new, like I say, equal pay, family pay, even the dynamics of defining a family as a nucleus of 2 people, whether it be 2 males, 2 females, to trans, that had to stop. We had this conversation and we have this definition and changing. Some families in some homes have 3 people taking care of their children together as a community. When they say it takes a village, that's what it is. They may have 4 people, they may have six adults and then all the other children. That is what a family is. And even especially for disabled people, that became a big part of it. And then the last area that FDR also did, and this still is around, a lot of people do not know this, disabled people do not have parents' rights. And there are several reports that the National Council of Disability did on this, Rocking the Cradle, and I'll get it and put it in the chat box. There's only now 3 states who have actually passed laws to protect the parents' rights of disabled people: Idaho, Kansas, and South Carolina. And that's because of some serious white disabled people who were living there. But that is also, right, a fear of our parents who won't go to school for PTA meetings because they're not quite sure that teacher's not going to turn them in and child welfare going to take their child from them. So it's still happening in 2022, this definition of not only what a family is, but the fact of the ability for you to be a parent and actually take care of this child, right? I'll just give you one case. We had a very young couple, both of them blind, about 18, 19 years old. They gave in Boston, Massachusetts, gave birth to their child. It was a girl. And the nurse, when she, held the baby and looked, and said, these 2 can't take care of this child. She called child welfare and they took that baby from those 2 people. Now, both sets of grandparents, maternal and paternal grandparents, had no disabilities. It's very, very unusual for that to happen. Most of the time it's hereditary, but fine. the state would not give that baby to maternal or paternal grandparents. It took them 7 years to fight to get their child back, a little girl. And they only had supervised weekend visits the whole 7 years until they got their child back. And that story is in the Cradle, that's this report. And that's just one of many that we have, that people actually have this concept that disabled people can't be parents. They can't possibly take care of their child because they're disabled. And so I'm just gonna put it there and wait for the rest of the conversation. I look forward to it.
That, i.e., I'm going to drop the mic right there. We appreciate you, Dara, dropping that wisdom. Can you put the name of that report in the chat? Would love to get that. I also want to lift up that you talked about care and violence, right? And there's this way in which family can be a place of care, or it can be a place of violence, right? If you think about, even if you go back to the origin of the word family, as I understand it in Roman law, meant a band of slaves. It meant it shares roots in Latin with house slave. It is intimately tied to dominion, and in fact, family in its original concept in that tradition was really more about dominion than about caring relationship, right? And so then, fast forward past that period into when, Christians were coming to take over these lands, they were using this notion of family as patriarchal dominion to define who they could exclude, who they could exterminate, who they could mutilate in the ways that you describe using violence, right? And one of the people that I want to name, Dr. Henry Clark, said there's a difference between Christianity and Christendom. And Christendom was really a political philosophy that sort of took some aspects of Christianity and leveraged them for colonial expansion and for domination, right? And so I think it's important just to name that, because if we're talking about how do we in this country actually move to support people in a caring way that reflects this different notion of family that is inclusive, then we have to really grapple with that history and understand that legacy as we've talked about it. And so that's kind of the question that I want to touch on as kind of a last question, or maybe the second to last question, we'll see, before we go to Q&A. And please do put your questions in the Q&A function. But this question is how, and Dara, you started to talk about this, but how do we begin to really make care for one another, the responsibility for care, whether it be disability care, child care, end of life care, how do we make that supported in this country? Like, what policies, how do we need to perhaps re-understand family in order to make that possible? Whoever wants to take this first.
You want me to go, Ed? Yeah, okay, no problem. You said that, no problem. I got, well, first of all, if I knew that, Zach, I wouldn't have a job or no more. That is the work, right? And that's what you're going to do in this wonderful fellowship that you have now, that we're so glad, right, to have you there. I think it's conversations like these are very much needed. I think that it is moving white people out of the center and leadership of the work in Washington, D.C. Let me be very clear. D.C. here, people call it the Beltway, right? We call it the Blockway. It is, right, set up to block people who think like myself. I'm blessed to say, right, that I'm an activist and a policymaker. That's a rarity in DC. As you all see how and Zach will tell you how I'm talking here is how I talk to these folks on that Hill, how I talk to when they bring me over to the White House. Yes, I'm blessed to go to the White House, and they think twice, because they have to say, oh dear God, what is she gonna say up in here? But there's not enough of us here telling people that, right? That and people don't want to believe that DC is the center of the policy that runs this country. I also think there are some really good policy briefs and policy laws, policy legislation that is coming. I keep telling people, register to vote. right? And vote every time and vote for people who think like us, right? That's why we have this, right? The squad, right, is now coming. And yes, there's only 6 of them or 8 of them, and they're coming, right? And we see the wave of them coming. But, you know, 5 years ago, no way a Cori Bush could sit in front of the Capitol and say, I'm not leaving till you, Joe Biden, give these people and extend the housing, right, moratorium. And that would have never happened, right? And those are the type of people, because that's where Cori came from, right? She was an activist. She is an activist. And so that has to happen in this league, you know, in this conversation of policy. But the other side too, you know, a lot of people get held up in that, Zach. What I also try to tell activists is, it's one thing to get a law passed. It's another thing to implement that law. And that is the side that, right, Black liberal liberation people are forgetting. They will pass a bill and they leave and they go. And it's like, they don't understand there is what's called rules and regulations. You got to write about this bill. And who gets to set that up? The white folks y'all left here, that you left to be in charge, because those are the people who are running those departments in the administration. That's why we have 3 branches of government: legislation and then administration, and what the administration does. The second part, which is, you know, it is codified in who we are as a people, the money. Nobody eat, right? When we do appropriations here, they just passed the appropriations bill last Friday. Biden signed it. Many people don't even know what that is. What that says is, Congress says, okay, here's your program. You want this family program? You want to change the definition of families and how families receive services? Okay, great. You have created a federally mandated program that has no funding to it. That is literally how most quote unquote progressive groups write these bills in these languages. You would never see that coming out of the Heritage Foundation. You would never see that coming out of Cato. And they look at you and say, no, you want to give it some money. And then if you're not in the room to tell them, here's the money and this is what's needed, all of these ideas and all of these things that are happening just won't happen. I will tell you, I've been in DC since 2004, been on the Hill doing this work. There are 6 of us, 6 people of color who do appropriations, who the appropriating staff and committee know. 6 at all these organizations here in DC, right? And literally have to fight for tooth and nail and say, oh no, you have to give this program more money. But when we look behind us, they're like, well, how many people you got behind you that are telling you we got to get this more than, you know, we're gonna increase this by 10% or 8%? Nobody. So I just want people to understand and know that we can have all these great ideas. We have to. And it is like a wheel with spokes. We are all part of this process. I will not lie. I've told you my strengths. I will tell you my weakness. I am not a creative person. Love the artwork that you did, Ev, right? I look at artists and say, oh my God, this is absolutely beautiful. I would never, right? But that's a part of creating the bills and the laws we want. That each one of us plays a part in that. And I will be very clear that in the part for us as Black liberation and BIPOC liberation folks, the part that is missing is that policy side all the way through, not just creating a law, but actually seeing it be implemented, staying on the government about what you're doing, holding them accountable. And we need to really do that. That is the part. That is why family, you could change all these definitions of families and everything else. It's Black folks who did it, it's BIPOC folks who did it, but then you leave. And it's white folks who are implementing it. Mm. And therein lies much of the problems.
Ev, same question to you. And in particular, if you could talk a little bit about you know, some of the campaigns that you've worked on that you've seen be successful, and kind of like what dynamic was present that made them successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there, I just want to appreciate you holding up that, you know, who are progressives, who are, you know, Democrats and Republicans are pretty much the same. I mean, they're on a continuum and they're not really at all supporting kind of the work and the vision of what we want. So what I would say, Zach, I really appreciated you focusing on care, because I think when we look at these attacks, you know, when we look at the attacks on trans communities right now and what's coming out of Texas and Governor Abbott's, you know, basically saying it's child abuse. I can't even, it's so fucked, you know, it's child abuse if you have a trans child and you want to provide them the care that they need in order to be able to kind of move through this in a way, I mean, to live, right? And so what does that mean when we're now, thinking about kind of the attacks on trans kids I mean, we have, last year, there was over 100 bills, anti-trans bills happening in this country. And 20 of them were in Texas, right? And so we now have in Texas is like, so one of the things I think we have to do, which we have been, is this kind of intersectional approach, right? So we need to build power across issues, across strategies. The way that organizations are funded in this country, it's by issue. So people working at the state level don't work with folks in the national level. People working on disability justice don't work with people who are working on immigrant rights. That's just a perfect way to make our, kind of vision, social change movement kind of fractured. And so we need to come together and say, we don't leave anyone behind. We don't throw anyone under the bus, whether or not it's to move a short, like it's better to move a policy in the short term to throw undocumented folks under the bus, to throw people with disabilities, to throw trans folks under the bus. We can't do that anymore in the social justice movement. And so we have to come together and see. The right is doing this in Texas. Texas is the hardest state to get an abortion. It has one of the hardest states, it's the hardest state, one of the hardest states to vote now with the voting laws, right? I mean, that's happening. I don't want to say it is, I mean, in the South is very difficult too, but I mean, you have attacks on voting rights, attacks on reproductive, on abortion access, and then you have attacks on trans children and families. And so this is just happening. The right is using this and they're replicating this. They started in the South, they're bringing it out, right, across the country. We have to be able to understand that we have to have this intersectional approach. We have to be able to build power collectively and be able to see and care for each other and care about each other's, not just family, but each other's issues and, to really build power, right? So, and then we learn from each other, right? The report that the Ella Baker Center and Forward Together did, we actually learned collectively what it means for families who have been impacted by the carceral system, because there's not that research out there. We have to create and make the connections and create the knowledge and the wisdom that will compel us all to kind of come together and build power. So just an example, on one of the fights that we were part of in Oregon, it was, a number of abortion access groups, reproductive justice groups, BIPOC-led groups, but we were able to pass one of the, strongest protections for abortion access, and it included undocumented immigrants and non-binary trans folks. It's the only one in the country. And so we want to policy isn't the only answer. Power, movement building is part of it. But when we create policy, again, we want to look to policies that are as inclusive and that don't leave anyone behind.
Thank you for that, Ev. Your comments really brought to mind Fort Sill in Oklahoma. And, we talk about the need for solidarity. Fort Sill is an example of, literally it could be you next. It was used for Japanese internment. And prior to that, it was used as an Indian boarding school. And they were proposing using it as an immigrant detention center. And in July 2019, Japanese American activist groups, AIM, Dream Action Oklahoma, Black Lives Matter, Oklahoma City, all came out in protest of that. And it just, to me, is this sort of like reminder of this long and tragic history of family separation in our country, and the need for intersectional solidarity, for movement building, for campaigning, and for implementing the victories that we win in the ways that y'all have described. So we have, I'm gonna give you all room to offer some kind of final comments before we open it up to Q&A, and I introduce Alicia, and wanted to see if you want to just take on this question, anything you haven't yet mentioned about what do we need for a liberated society where families of all kinds can come together and where kinship is valued. And then a different way to ask this question is, folks talk about Marxists believe in the abolition of family. What does this mean to you? Do you believe that the abolition of family is necessary as we fight towards liberation? And I'm going to pass that to you, Dara, first.
So just the easy one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. I just want to say, Ev, you're right. I don't believe policy is everything. That's why I said, the wheel, the spokes and the wheels, right? We're all part, and you're right. And I don't believe in the abolition of family because I like we just said, I believe that people need to define family themselves. Right. That's what I do believe. If COVID hasn't taught people anything, and this is one part I didn't mention, is loneliness, is the fact that I'm not married, I have no kids. All of my immediate family is in New York, New Jersey, where I grew up, right, from Newark, New Jersey. I have a couple of cousins here in DC, but we couldn't see each other, right, because of COVID. So I'm blessed too that I do have family. So I wasn't really lonely, not to have someone touch you and hug you. Right, like my aunties, when I'm in New York, I'm a different person, honey. People are like, "This is Dara, we know." I'm getting my hugs and my kisses because my mom has passed on, right? And so I couldn't have that for almost 2 years. That is a part of being who we are, is connecting to people. So I'm not one to say abolition of family. I'm one to say abolition of people defining what people's families are and how people run their house. My father always told me this, I would be like, but Daddy, so-and-so could go to the party and he would be like, this is the Baldwin house. There is, right, we do what the Baldwins do here. Don't be telling me about what other people do there. And that's it, is your home and how you define your home and define who is part of your family and define what you do with your family, as long as you're not harming other people. I do believe in that. And I do believe that's what Marxist was trying to say as well. If you really read about, I tell people, don't read a book once, read the book 2, 3, especially if you're trying to really get to understand what somebody's saying, read the book 2, 3, 4 times, and then come and talk to me about, right, like what this means. And so I'll just say that, and I see the questions in the Q&A, I want to answer them, especially the questions around mental health diagnosis. We do not use the word illness, but we'll get to that.
Right on. Thank you for that, Dara. Ev, closing thoughts here, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, I mean, I want to build on what Dara said, that I think that our connections with the people that we care about, whom we love, are what brings us meaning in our lives as a human species. And most of us, I don't say all of us, but most of us, it's harmful to be alone and isolated. And so the problem isn't we need to be able to define family, because the powers that be have taken that and systematically put in place a definition that is oppressive and racist and patriarchal, that's classist, right? Capitalism uses the family and the role to create these roles, which then workers don't kind of rise up, right? Because they're used to an authoritarian figure in their family. They have patriarchal gender norms, like that gets practiced in the family. Violence also is practiced in the family, and sexual harassment. So there's ways in which all of this gets supported with a traditional family structure. And so we're saying, and I'm saying, and I'm hearing Dara and Zach, that what we want to be able to have the freedom to, and agency to create family the way we want to, and also get the supports that our family needs, right? And not just, the quote the stat that you had, Zach, earlier about white families actually being more subsidized than any other, yeah. So what, but we don't know that. People aren't taught that. And so, the mythology that is based on white supremacy and patriarchy of the family is really harmful. And that's what we want to get rid of. And because we want all of our families to be able to thrive.
Right on. Thank you for that, Ev. Really appreciate it. And appreciate you both so much. And I also appreciate Alicia Harga, who is a UC Berkeley student studying African American studies and organizer with local community groups fighting for public safety beyond policing, and I get to bring Alicia onto the virtual stage. And Alicia is going to moderate our Q&A, and also was responsible for really drafting some of these questions. So just, Alicia, I want to thank you for all of your work, and I will pass it to you now.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you both for a fantastic panel discussion that we've had thus far. I want to jump into some of the questions that we have from the audience. I know you were interested in answering this one, and do correct my language, is mental illness considered a disability? And I see that as connected to this other question, which is talking about, I know that I work with unhoused communities and we often hear the term service resistant, which I and most other people take major issue with. And so this is about service resistant people who have, and again, correct my language, mental illnesses. And I think that that also can relate to ideas of kinship and ideas of family. And I'd love to have you speak on how those are connected.
So thank you, and thank you for your work, Alicia, and the wonderful questions. So let me get to, so the definition, and this is again basic, of a disability is anything that hinders your everyday life. Standing, sitting, swallowing, hearing, right? Anything that hinders your everyday life. That's a basic definition, but just so you know. So yes, and we do not use terms of illness, right? We speak in positive, right? And so there is nothing wrong with having a disability. If you don't learn anything, there's nothing wrong with it. People try to tell us there was something wrong with being Black, and for years, right? And we had to tell them no way. So when we speak in terms of illness, that means, right, there's something like there's a sickness or something. And also illness, people usually get over illnesses. Usually in mental, right? So we say mental health diagnoses. And like I said, I do trainings on this, and I have a chart of words to say and words not to say, but language changes all the time, right? So understand that, also understand that. And also ask the person you're dealing with. But in general, like when I'm writing, when I'm speaking, we say mental health diagnosis. It's a mouthful, but guess what? So is me saying other words that other people want you to say. But anyway, and what that means is most people who get a mental health diagnosis, it stays with you for the rest of your life. Now, it might not manifest. It may not, it'll, suppress and go, like literally all of us who went through COVID, PTSD is a mental health diagnosis. I was on a panel about children and education. Every child in this country is now a child with a disability because they went through this pandemic and the PTSD that it is. Don't fool yourselves, right? So we call it episodic a disability. So you may be diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia or even PTSD. You're going along with your life and you say, okay, somebody says they're cured. And I'm like, no, you're walking down the street and a car goes, someone gets hit by a car or whatever. And it sends you right back to that moment where you were diagnosed with bipolar. And so that is also why we have peer-to-peer support. It's set up like AA. You have a person with another mental health diagnosis you can call and say, I'm in crisis. Right. And so that's what, right. So yes, having a mental health diagnosis is a disability. And there are disabilities that don't manifest all the time. HIV and AIDS, right? MS, multiple sclerosis. If you have been cured of cancer, if you have been treated of cancer, you're never cured of cancer, cancer continues stays in your body, it may not manifest. And so, but you may need the reasonable accommodation, right? You need to sit at a desk, but you can't sit there you can only work 4 days. That's your right, because of your cancer, because of what's happened to you. Okay, so but mental health is that. The second question, yes, we hear it all the time about people who are refusing services, don't want services, or even I think Carol put the question in here about the success rate, right, of putting people into apartments and it not working out. So number one, let's be very clear about who these researchers are, and all of us who do research, right? Your hypotheses and the question you asked, the indicators to which you got to it, and the methodology and how you're doing and collecting this data. It is all centered on white folks and white folks' questions and white folks' answers. It is not centered on us, who we just talked about, our definition of family, our definition of community. And also, as I said, this is your home and how you live. With that said, we have not had really good success rates with people who are coming from institutions specifically, but also from unhoused, as Carol has said, like if you lived in New York and you were in a subway system and you had friends around you and things like that. That's why we do believe in group homes, no more than 5, 6, no more than 8 people living in a house, then you hit an institution. And it's called LRE, least restrictive environment. We get these faith-based places who make these people go to church, right? We're like, no, right? Or we gonna get that, we're gonna convert the gayism out of you, right? Like that's not a right. You can't have family visiting you. We have people who lock the refrigerator and tell people you can only eat, right? Like that's right. That's not the least restrictive environment. But when you have the least restrictive environment and they still have independent living, they can come and go as they please. They can get a job. They can have a mate come stay with them. You see that kind of community does better, or that person does better in that system. The last thing I'll say, also in housing, you probably have heard of PSH, which is permanent supportive housing. It is the worst program out there created by white folks. Why? Permanent supportive housing is usually 1 bedroom. And what was this whole conversation talking about is family, right? So most people, right, if they have a family, I'm gonna say women, but of course, all males, trans people have children. And you are telling them, okay, you can go have this apartment, and in permanent supportive housing is you live in a building that usually in the bottom, you can go for your clinical services, you can go for physical therapy, occupation. You don't have to leave the building, you get everything you need right there. And that is a great program the way you want to set it up. And the veterans was the one who showed this. The male veterans did well. It was the female veterans who got permanent supportive housing who didn't do well because they couldn't have their children. Because in this country, you can't live in a 1-bedroom apartment and have your children. That's child welfare laws. And we understand that, right? We have incest and things that happen. That's why a child needs another bedroom, but they keep building permanent supportive housing with 1 bedroom. And then they want to know why these people with mental health diagnoses are not surviving, because you have now broken them away from their family, from the family they created, right? Regardless if it's a partner who's the same age as them or a child who they want to live with them, they can't come with them to that permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing is not working. I use air quotes, because of the definitions you all set up and because of the way in which you want to define this. And you don't want to realize, and that we got that information from those people, those closest to the problem or closest to the solution. And that's how we knew this. And that because those people had to go back into the institution, or because they went back, they went on the street, become unhoused, and we interviewed them and we talked to them, and that's what they told us. So it's a really two-sword, double-edged kind of conversation around it, but it goes back to family, right? And how these people survive. I don't think anyone survives. Not only I say that, there are people who can be by themselves, but we need to start thinking about that and start setting up our programs and how we help people, not by what we define as being housed and being safe, but by what they define as being housed and being safe.
Evelyn, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Dara, thank you for all. I just feel like in the social justice movement, disability justice is such a big learning curve for us, and that, your definition, the definition that you use, anything that hinders your everyday life. And so disability is not the problem, right? It's the access issues, right? And so like, if I didn't have glasses, I wouldn't be able to do everyday things. I wouldn't be able to work, literally, right? So I just want to, and one of the things Patty Byrne shared with me that I've now tried to use in daily practice is like when we get together and we have meetings, and oftentimes folks will do check-ins, right? And so I now say let's check in and also bring up any access issues you have, right? And then I have to explain what that is, and then you get all of a sudden people are like, I can't sit for all this time. If I go, I'm going to have to get off Zoom because my eyes, I have these conditions, whatever. So I guess the point is that disability, like Dara, you said, we are all potentially, even if we don't define as people with disabilities, we could at any minute, right? And so it behooves us to be, as a movement, to be able to learn what we need to learn to accept, to try to bring in disability justice into the work that we do. And what you were saying about, I think families really, lifts up, like if we are able to change conditions for, Black, Indigenous, people and families with disabilities, we're going to change it for everyone else. And so I think that this is anyway, so I just wanted to add that piece around kind of the learning that we have to that is on us to be able to like bring forth and center disability justice.
Thank you. And you just said that that's the statute definition of disability. Do you want to share with us what you consider to be the movement definition of disability?
Oh yeah, and Ev, you're right. And I say that because I do policy and people are like that is the statutory that's in the ADA, is written. And actually in 1990, when they wrote the ADA, right, we had, like I said, a Supreme Court case, another case, many cases that made them go back and change the definition of ADA. So remember in 1990, you had the racist Jesse Helms, a homophobic Jesse Helms, and all the rest of them. So HIV and AIDS wasn't in there, right? And even now LGBTQ stuff that's not in there, it's not in the ADA. And in 2008, we had to go back and open the ADA. It's called Opening a Civil Right. And they did the ADA amendments. And in the ADAA of 2008 is where they changed, they gave this, that the court said your definition of disability is too narrow. So we went in 2008 and opened it up and and let me be very clear, you do not want to open civil rights right now, people. And I love the Equality Act, but the Equality Act opens 5 civil rights. That's a problem with this Congress we got here. You see these folks who's up here. So anyway, that's the statutory definition. The movement, when you ask me what the movement definition is, I'm going to go back to doing this work. It is the definition that people wish to give you. That's their definition of what they, of where you are in your life. That is up to you to decide, if you're, and we keep, and thank you, Ed, for, embracing it, that if you do disabilities, you'll cover everyone, but it is a personal thing for you to decide if you are and I say to you right now, I'm non-disabled, but let me be very, I won't lie to you, during COVID, there were some times when I was like, oh no, I got some serious clinical mental health problems going on here. Because I never went in my life without someone hugging me for more than 30 days. And, so you get affected by that. And so you have to admit those things to yourself. It doesn't mean that I never was disabled, right? And so that I just say that. So when the movement definition, to me, that is part of disability justice. That is part of number 3 principle of for us, by us, doing it right. It's your definition. And if you believe you are a disabled person, because there are people who believe they're disabled people, and people tell them, no, you're not disabled, because it's not visible, to them, or they don't have it, So I believe that too. Like, you define who your disability is, just like you define who your family is. But the statutory, and I get it all the time. I don't know why people think that mental health diagnosis is separate from, it's not a disability. I don't know that. I get that question a lot, but it is considered, and if people need services, and if people need any kind of work or anything needed, and there's more laws that help and cover people with mental health diagnoses than there are other disabilities, just so you know that too.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one last question, and I want to ask a question that's kind of looking forwards. So Zach has been focusing a lot on family separation, and we know that family separation has effects that cascade through generations, be it if you call it transgenerational trauma, epigenetic trauma, or just trauma, that stuff passes through generations. And so is there anything that we can do to retroactively heal or lessen the trauma of separation? And this is both separation that's happened historically, and then also separation that happens, for example, through the child welfare system.
You want me to say? I'll take it real quick. Yes, there are many things. Like I said, I did 20 years of healthcare, of public health, and there is a group. It's interrupting criminalization, led by Miriam Kaba and Andrea Ritchie. They were at Columbia University Barnhart, where we work on this and trying to educate clinicians and people differently, right? In a clinical world, meaning social workers, public health people, nurses, doctors, people who run ERs, emergency rooms, and things like that. They are taught SOP is called standard operating procedure. So I worked in the administrative part of hospitals, so I know this. SOP is standard operating procedure. If there's a problem, call the police. right? Call law enforcement. And the definition of public safety is based on, right, white supremacist, patriarchal, racist of what public safety is. We need to start defining that definition different, right? And we need to start having these serious conversations around this and get that education and educating folks who are going to interact with families and people out of that. And there are many BIPOC folks who are these professionals who are having a hard time, who are now having mental health diagnoses because they had to do this. They watched, right, the horror of this child being taken from their family, or this, right, trans child, you know, being not getting the services they need, what's happening in Texas. And so that is causing problems for our Black and brown professionals who want to do this work, who really want to help but can't. And then the last thing I'll say is just stop doing it. Just stop being evil. And right, we need to come from a place of care and love, and we will resolve some of these issues.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I mean, it's a systemic issue. All these the practices and policies of the state that continue to tear apart and to rip and separate families is the problem. And what I would say is we are going to have a mental health crisis, in that there are not going to be enough, and there already are not enough practitioners, services that this country is needing now and will need, based on what's happening around the pandemic, around the violence, around climate change. Like, there's just all of it, a whole generation. I mean, I have 2 daughters, and it's really hard. Mental health issues are going to be front and center, and we're going to have to come up with new ways of providing funding and creating opportunities for people to get their needs met.
Thank you. And I know that I said that was the last question, but I think Ms. Daphne Muse asked a fantastic question, which is, would the 3 of y'all ever be down to teach a class on all of this? Because this is very interesting and we are out of time.
Let's do it, y'all. Thank you, Ms. Muse, for that. That's a great question. And we are out of time, but we are out of time for part 1. There is a part 2 on March 30th. I want to thank you, Ev. Thank you, Dara. Y'all have been amazing. Thank you to Lee, Tiana, and the Black Studies Collaboratory for helping to host this and bring us together. Just really appreciate all of your wisdom. And I would add to that healing question, reparations. For every generation that's been harmed, that many generations should receive some level of support and recompense, and in all of the ways. So on that note, just want to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being here. The part 2 sign up is in the chat, so please do go ahead and register. But we just want to say thank you so much for being here and for your time.